Pennsylvania is shaping up to be the state to win this presidential election cycle, especially considering that Joe Biden has deep ties there, and President Trump won Pennsylvania in 2016 by less than 1 percentage point. A recent Reuters Ipsos poll shows Biden leading Trump in the Keystone State by 7 points currently.
Joining us to discuss the state of the presidential race in Pennsylvania is national politics reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Jonathan Tamari. Great to have you, Jonathan.
Good to see you, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me.
So just lay on kind of the dynamics of the state of Pennsylvania. For candidates to be able to win the state, what do they need to be able to do?
Well, it's just a very diverse, multifaceted state. So there's a lot that you need to do. You've got to cover a lot of different areas. You have obviously the two liberal cities of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh that are the Democratic foundation in that state, and Democrats need big numbers coming out of those places. You've got suburbs around both of those cities that have trended much more Democratic since 2016 and that are now another prong of the Democratic coalition there. And then you've got these vast rural areas, these post-industrial small cities that have become increasingly Republican, increasingly red. So it's a really complex state. You've got to kind of be able to reach a lot of different voters and with a lot of different points of view at the same time. And that's what makes it so competitive, makes it so hard to predict.
So interesting, Jonathan. So let's talk about this. What did the Trump 2016 Pennsylvania coalition look like? Is he holding on to that coalition or is he losing it?
So the Trump 2016 coalition was largely white working class voters, and a lot of these places that had these strong industrial histories, coal mines, steel mines, or steel mills, things like that, that had kind of been in decline and that really were drawn to his Make America Great Again message and his argument that he was going to fight for those people who felt like they had been left behind. And he won those voters in numbers that just stunned people in both parties. And in fact, many of these voters were traditionally Democrats. And so that's why when on Election Day, some of the numbers came out of places like Erie County, Luzerne County, they were just shocking to people who worked in politics in Pennsylvania for a very long time. At the same time, what he did in winning those places, though, he turned off a lot of voters in suburban areas that had traditionally voted Republican and did not vote Republican in those same numbers in 2016. He is basically going for the same coalition this time around. He's talking to the same exact voters. He's basically trying to do what he did in 2016, only bigger. And there is evidence that there are a lot of white voters who did not go to college, who worked blue-collar jobs, who did not vote in 2016. And he's trying to get those people out, basically build what he did last time even more. It's not clear. You know, the polls show some small but still measurable share of Trump voters in 2016 have peeled away from him and are going for Joe Biden. Biden is, to a lot of these voters, seen as more acceptable than Hillary Clinton was. And it's a very small share. But remember, he won by less than 1 percentage point. So even a small shift could make a big difference.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point. Talk to me about the politics of fracking there. I think, Joe Biden gets pressed on this issue a lot. He has come out repeatedly and say, I don't want to ban fracking, which is different from some members of the Democratic Party. I think the polling on this is a little bit different, though, than what a lot of people suspect. In the state of Pennsylvania, there was a CBS News poll that came out that showed pretty much a 50-50 split on favoring fracking versus banning fracking. Is this as important an issue in the state as it is portrayed to be nationally?
It is hugely important, particularly in the southwestern part of the state, where the president ran up really big margins in 2016. For a lot of people there, they are connected to that industry, whether directly or indirectly, or they have family members who work in that industry. And while there is that polling that shows there's kind of an even split about banning or not banning, I think that there is a difference in intensity. For the people who favor fracking, it's almost a single issue vote for them because they see it as their livelihood. And a lot of them kind of see it almost as part of their culture of southwestern Pennsylvania that has this long coal and steel history. And so it does resonate with a lot of voters in that area, in those areas where, again, that I said Trump is trying to boost his numbers even beyond 2016. And Biden, as you point out, he has not called for banning fracking. He has said that he would stop new permits on federal land, but would not stop existing fracking. So the Trump campaign is attacking him, and he's really pushing back hard on that because they both know that there's a segment of voters that could be, almost the only issue that they really vote on.
Interesting. Jonathan, could you also talk about, I think we shouldn't ignore the suburbs here, right? That's what everybody talks about nationally. As I understand it, much of Biden's increased support, even if Trump were to held on, he could still win the state by just simply driving up numbers in the mainline Philadelphia area. Could you talk about that? What early voting numbers look like, and so much more in terms of support in that area?
Yeah, that's totally right. There was a major shift in the suburbs in 2016 from past elections in favor of Democrats, and it has actually only increased since then. We've seen in elections 2017, 18, 19, local elections, state legislative elections, congressional elections, Democrats are just sweeping through there. To give you one example, Chester County was probably the last, one of the most Republican remaining of those collar counties. The Democratic chair there had told me recently that they've won 18 of the last 21 countywide elections. And it's not just winning the elections. You have this contingent of suburban, particularly women, educated suburban women who have just become energized and activated ever since Trump won in 2016. And they're out knocking doors, volunteering, making donations. And these are areas, it's important to note, of the state that have grown since 2016. Whereas a lot of the areas where Trump is strong have shrunk. So yes, if Biden can run up those numbers in the suburbs the way that we've seen in these past few elections, it might be enough to overcome Trump's strength in the rest of the state just by itself.
Can you talk to us a little bit about just the mechanics of voting in the state of Pennsylvania? This is one of the states that people have been most concerned about. There's this issue of naked ballots. I believe Pennsylvania is one of the states where you can't begin to count the mail-in ballots until Election Day. So the expectation is that the ultimate vote totals could be very delayed, which is obviously significant considering that the Democratic voters are more likely to vote early, the Republican voters are more likely to show up day of, and those numbers will come in more quickly. What are some of the concerns that people have in the state of Pennsylvania about how this is all going to go?
Yeah, this is a huge concern. I mean, even before the pandemic, this was the first year that anybody could vote by mail in Pennsylvania without an excuse. So already we were talking about a major shift from past elections. And then you add the pandemic in, and obviously that has increased by an order of magnitude. And we've seen the president single out Philadelphia to raise questions about mail ballots, to raise questions about in-person voting, to raise questions about early voting by mail. He's basically attacked every method of voting that you can utilize in Philadelphia. And so there's a lot of attention on the city and on the state. As you pointed out, there is this concern about naked mail ballots where a person can't just mail their ballot in. It has to be inside a secrecy envelope. And so there's a question of will people who are new to mail voting do that properly? And there's been concerns in Philadelphia alone that as many as 100,000 ballots could be thrown out because of this. And remember, Pennsylvania was decided by just 44,000 votes in the last election. So there's a lot of education going on by the Democratic Party to try to get their voters to do this properly. There are now some people who are saying go and vote early in person or go and vote in person instead of mail, even after they've been talking about mail for a number of months. And as you pointed out, it could be that the vote shifts over time because Trump's support, as we've discussed here, is really in those rural areas. Those counties will be able to count the votes faster because they just have smaller numbers of people to count. More of Trump's supporters will vote in person. The mail ballots under current law cannot be opened until on Election Day. And so that could take several days to just open them, process them, check them all for their signatures. And the current law also allows ballots to be counted if they're postmarked by Election Day, but arrive, I believe, up to 3 days after Election Day. So that, again, if it's a really close election, yeah, we could be waiting till Friday, Saturday, Sunday to see which way Pennsylvania goes, and that could possibly decide which way the White House goes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Really,
intense.
Really smart. Good stuff here.
Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
Our pleasure. Still to come, a major bank executive wants to be New York City's next mayor. David Sird is going to join us to discuss the ins and outs of that when Rising returns.